The New York Jets last night absolutely handed it to the New England Patriots, as it seems like this divisional rivalry that has been very one-sided over the past decade or so is now swinging the other direction. The Patriots had won 8 straight games in MetLife. The win streak overall was even that much longer until the Jets beat the Pats in what was an ugly game in Week 18. So that is 2 straight wins for the Jets over the Patriots. Again, as both of these franchises are in drastically different spots. And the number one takeaway of this game, of course, has to be the play of Aaron Rodgers, who really looked like himself once again fully. Now, obviously, this isn't MVP Aaron Rodgers necessarily that is controlling everything quite in the same way, but he was excellent in this game, 27 of 35, 281 yards and 2 touchdowns, and the biggest thing was that mobility was coming back some. He talked about it in his post-game interview that he himself is still sort of working back to sort of trust his body once again to make those plays rolling out of the pocket and getting upfield, and that's what he was able to do in this game. We talked yesterday about the fact that Geno Smith was able to have success against New England based off of his ability to move out of the pocket and hit players downfield, where off of those initial reads, the Patriots defense has looked pretty good, but then once you move the pocket, it feels like the defensive breakdowns start to pick up, and that's what Aaron Rodgers was able to do. He had a couple scrambles himself, 3 of them upfield for a total of 18 yards. That is a pretty substantial deal for the Jets, where again, Aaron Rodgers, it's all about the mental upside with him and his understanding of the game, but one of the biggest hesitations was the fact that up to this point, he really hadn't looked comfortable moving around in the pocket, and it seemed like he sort of put that to rest. Now, I'm sure it's not something that he is going to overly want to lean on, is using that mobility, but now it at least feels as if it is an option for New York, which is a huge deal. And we saw him as well sort of continuing to get more comfortable in this Jets offense. We saw week 1, it was only 2 actual wide receivers that caught passes for him. There's definitely, yes, still some, short-handedness and lack of depth in that receiver room. But you look at the fact that he was able to spread the ball out, hit 8 different players, 4 receptions in this game, including, I believe it was 4 wide receivers with Lazard, Mike Williams, Xavier Gibson, and of course, Garrett Wilson. So that is a huge deal as well, that he just seems a lot more comfortable in the entire environment. Tyler Conklin, their tight end, had a pretty big game as well, 93 yards. So this is overall a very encouraging performance for the Jets. We talked about this yesterday. It is also against the New England Patriots, so you do have to keep that in mind. But all things considered, I think Jets fans have to come away very pleased with this game as a whole. We talk about sort of Rodgers' ability to spread the ball out, the fact that he can at least be a little bit more mobile. There are now layers to this offense, and we saw this little bit of a 2-headed monster that is emerging in that running back room between Breece Hall and Braylon Allen. Now, Breece was dealing with a quad injury, I believe it was, during the Titans game last week. Short week, so that probably played some amount of a factor into the amount of carries that Braylon Allen was also getting. But 16 carries for Breece Hall, 11 carries for Allen. Like I mentioned, yes, Breece was probably given a slightly reduced role given the fact that he is dealing with some physical ailments, at least to some degree. But the other part of it is Braylon Allen is just making it impossible to not continue feeding him the rock, where he is averaging 5.6 yards per touch up to this point through 3 weeks. And from a pure rushing standpoint, he is outperforming Breece Hall inside of the tackles, which is not an indictment on Breece Hall because he's still an excellent running back, but it is also just the fact that they have maybe two different running backs with a little bit different flavors. Braylon Allen is a wrecking ball up the middle. I wouldn't say he doesn't have explosive plays to his game, because we saw that was clearly not the case based off of his performance against the Titans in week 2, but he can just get maybe a little bit more done in terms of, having that power back once it gets towards the goal line. Now, I know Breece Hall actually did rush for a touchdown last night and did a very good job of weaving through traffic and getting in there. So, again, it's not like complimenting Braylon Allen is any sort of a putting down Breece Hall, but it's just to say that they have two different options, and they are both pretty versatile, all things considered. So that is a huge plus as well. Overall, their offense was excellent in this game. If I were to point to two things that were red flags, number one would be the injury to starting right tackle Morgan Moses. He ended up leaving the game right at the end of the third quarter. He ended up getting pushed back by Patriots defensive tackle Dietrich Wise, and then some bodies came in from behind and ultimately shook him up there. It's looking like a leg injury. We don't know exactly what the classification is at this point. We don't know the severity of it, but it does sound like it's not supposed to be season ending, which is great news for the Jets. Obviously, it's probably going to keep him out some time, but I don't think it looks like anything that should be majorly concerning in terms of super long term there, which is obviously good for them that they're eventually going to be able to get him back. But the fact that now their first round draft pick, Olu Fashanu, is going to get maybe a little bit more experience here is not the worst thing in the world, where Fashanu was one of the highest rated tackle prospects coming into the draft. He ends up falling to 11 after a couple other tackles. I mean, Joe Alt was also sort of, it seemed like it was 1A, 1B for a while, with Alt pulling away at the end there. JC Latham ended up going, I believe it was 7th overall. So ultimately, Fashanu ends up falling to the Jets, which is a great sign for them, because they know that they are going to need a left tackle in the future. Tyron Smith at this point in his late 30s is not going to be the franchise left tackle. For whatever it's worth as well, Tyron Smith has missed a lot of time over the past handful of years. So there's a chance that as they go into a playoff hunt, they might need a little bit of extra depth. And Fashanu, the fact that he's going to be able to get some opportunities, especially against a pretty manageable schedule, is not the worst thing in the world. Again, as long as Moses is going to eventually come back, thoughts are out with him. I think he should be okay. But the other side would be the clock management still hasn't been great yet up to this point. Now, obviously, there are bigger issues at hand for the Jets, and they seem to be solving them. But some weird stuff going on. I thought that the clock management at the end of the first half was really poor from them. It was just weird. They played with no sense of urgency or tempo. They were very casual about it. To be fair, the Patriots aren't exactly a threatening offense on the other side of the ball, but they had weird usage of their timeouts. Again, they were just so casual getting up the field, and then they kind of burned all their timeouts in this one stretch, where I thought, at least if you're going to play with this slow pace early on, maybe throw in a timeout earlier and then try and hold on to one. I think they used their last one with around 40 seconds left in the half, and then from there had to play a lot more conservative in terms of, taking shots. It was 24 seconds, actually, as I correct myself on the fly, of when they used their last timeout, but then they proceeded to run another 4 plays. And at that point, having no timeouts with 20 or so seconds left, it just sort of limits you in terms of how much further you can advance the ball. They end up getting into reasonable field goal range. Greg Zuerlein sets up for a 45-yard field goal, and he misses that one wide left. So a little bit of points left on the board there, but again, sort of picking at straws there. And then the other part of that conversation would be the fact that 3 times against the Titans last week, we saw this Jets offense sort of not doing a great job of working up against the play clock. And in this game, we saw that they were able to, they They had to call timeouts twice last week to avoid delay of game penalties. They did a pretty good job for the most part, but coming out of that first drive in the second half, they did also have to burn a timeout there. So just something, again, maybe a little nitpicky, but something that I noticed and maybe a little bit of a trend there. But we're going to briefly run through the Patriots side of this game because it was a total disaster. The reality of the situation is that was probably the team that I at least had in my expectations going into the year. They just overperformed in those first 2 weeks, and that's not to say that they can't eventually bounce back here. The Jets would have, as many excuses as anybody in terms of playing on this short week, their third game in 11 days. But the Patriots as well, a young team, go to overtime on Sunday, having this short week. It was very emotional then. Again, maybe I'm just making excuses here, but it did feel like a little bit of a letdown spot. I thought the Patriots were going to cover. That's what I predicted yesterday, but that line was so fishy, I should have been scared off there. But obviously now there are a lot of Patriots fans that, both sides of the ball. The entire team was really bad in this game. You can talk about the defense, which allowed, 100 extra yards after missed tackles. That was a stat that Amazon Prime showed at one point, one of those next generation stats. The entire team stunk. But now there are Patriots fans that are calling for Drake Maye, who did get to play in his NFL debut in the fourth quarter. Nothing spectacular. He was 4 of 8 with 22 yards. He had a couple carries, one of them going for 11 yards. So he got the Patriots into the red zone. I believe it was fully into the red zone. We'll double check here, but that was the closest. Yeah, it was down to the Jets 7. That was the closest that New England had gotten all game to the red zone, to the end zone, I should say. So, there is that going for them. It was against backups. I thought May looked good, not great. Did almost throw an interception on his first play. He was sacked a couple times. One of them was a little bit more on his fault. But again, that idea of taking hits is why I still stand by the fact that the Patriots should not rush to start Drake Maye. You look at that offensive line, it was a disaster all game long. Ultimately, the Jets recorded 7 sacks in this game. And I'm not jumping to sort of ruin the developmental track. And again, maybe it's slightly cowardly, but I think it's more responsible than anything, especially given the hardships we're seeing with a lot of these young quarterbacks in the NFL today, that the Patriots are being a little bit more cautious. And it sounds like Drake Maye is still sticking with Jacoby Brissett going forward, who did have a pretty rough game, just 98 yards passing. But I also, outside of a throw to Austin Hooper that he was off on in the second quarter, I don't know how much there really was for him to do there. Got nothing from the run game. Ramondre Stevenson, just 23 yards. A bad performance there. Again, not that it's totally his fault. Opposing defenses are going to continue to go all out against the run until the Patriots can show that they have any sort of a passing attack to, be scared of, or at least any form threatened by. The Pats had, one drive with Brissett where they were able to get down to the 23-yard line, and then the offensive line showed its head, picking up 3 consecutive holding penalties and allowing a sack. So that Patriots team is just a mess, is the reality of the situation. We can go into it a bit further, but all of my thoughts on it from yesterday in terms of this idea of needing to have some patience because this overall New England roster is such a mess, I still stand by everything I said there. But let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section. Again, messy game there. Encouraging for the Jets. We're going to, of course, need to see them do it, against heightened competition in the coming weeks. But they have the Broncos and the Vikings in 2 consecutive games. Vikings game in London, so maybe a little bit of a weird one there. And then they are at home against the Bills. And that is sort of where we're looking at that true test kicking in. So we'll see about that. But as for now, Jets fans, enjoy this one. I'm sure it feels good to beat up on the Patriots after all of these years, but let me know what your thoughts are in the comments section. But we're now going to be moving on to the remainder of the Week 3 NFL slate, and I want to talk about some of the key storylines of the biggest games of the weekend. Feels like overall a pretty good set of matchups that could tell us a lot of answers to some of these questions that we've been having over the first couple weeks. So I want to dive into all of that. But before we do so, going to take a quick break here. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back.